Hi FLTAs once again, and this is the fourth video and the final video in the series of pre-PDO videos. And this one is perhaps it's a little bit longer and has a lot of information. And there's one activity at the very end, activity 8. But this is a preparation for our PDO, because on the first day of the PDO we're going to be discussing case studies that are true stories of accounts of former FLTAs that have had issues in the United States. And this video is more of an awareness video to help you handle any challenges that you might face on the interpersonal level while there. So we're calling this Maintaining Appropriate Interpersonal Relationships While in the U.S., and that is understanding the laws, policies, and cultural norms that pertain to appropriate personal relationships while in the United States. Once you understand, then you're in a much better position to navigate interpersonal relationships in an appropriate way and to maintain a happy and healthy experience with other people while in the United States. So it's first important to know a little bit about the cultural norms and where they might be a little bit different from what you're used to. And obviously all cultures have these norms and they have cues. Cues are what tells you, or what you think is telling you, what another person is trying to say to you or wants you to do. And it's very easy to misread a person in another culture. And you may not know when certain words or gestures are unwelcome or offensive to native speakers of a language, even if you've studied that language, because it's not a language issue, it's a culture issue. For example, you may think that saying something is a compliment, and you may find that somebody else considers it to be offensive. In some cultures, it also may be perfectly acceptable to reach out and touch someone else's child, even a stranger's child, in public, simply as an expression of warmth. And in some cultures, members of the same sex who are just friends may show more physical affection for one another than in other cultures. I mean that there are different boundaries for same sex and opposite sex. Some cultures, public displays of affection between members of the opposite sex are not acceptable behavior, and in some cultures, they are. In some cultures, students do not address their professors, advisors, or supervisors by their first names, and they would not be comfortable doing so. In some cultures, because of the strong sense of collectivity and many societal rules governing behavior, including dress, there are many taboos and collective checks to keep people in conformity with societal expectations and norms. What I mean here is that some cultures police their people more than other cultures and tell them, you can do this, you can't do this, you can wear this, you can't wear this. Some cultures police their society more than other cultures. And they do this because they place the society in a position of being more important than the individual. In some cultures, people who violate the norms or who behave outside the prescribed role for their gender, class, or culture can be punished. The United States, even though it is a country of diverse races, ethnicities, religions, and sexualities, has certain shared cultural traits. Values are at the core of culture. So it's not accurate to say that in the United States anything goes, any behavior goes, any form of dress goes. There are cultural norms. The United States is not a restrained culture relative to many others, but that does not mean that Americans are more sexually permissive or have fewer boundaries of what is acceptable. Don't interpret Americans' way of dress as a reflection of their sexual behavior. For example, you may see Americans wearing a lot less than someone in the Arab world might wear. But it doesn't mean that their attitude towards sexual behavior is different. They could be conservative. Don't interpret their manner with you as an indication of their interest in you sexually. What I mean here is that the way people show friendliness in cultures is different. And smiling, laughing, all of these things, you cannot interpret them the way you would interpret them with someone from your own culture. In the United States, age is a better indicator than rank or status of how people are addressed. Don't confuse ways of address with respect. Some of your professors or advisors may permit you to use their first name in addressing them, but this is not a sign that they are trying to establish a personal relationship with you. Forms of address you use with others happen naturally over time. Feel free to ask someone how he or she would prefer to be called. Like other countries, the US has laws protecting individuals from unwanted and unwelcome behavior from other individuals. In addition, universities have their own codes of conduct. Unlike in some countries, these laws are strictly enforced, and reporting of cases is easier and more common. There is less shame or stigma in reporting cases in the US than in more conservative cultures. I also want to point out that there is much less family involvement in cases. For example, if a student accuses another student of sexual harassment, it is very unlikely that the families will get involved. So the case will be dealt with at the individual level, and the families may never know that the case happened. In the United States, what is very different from the Arab world is the role of the police force on campus or off campus. The university may use the police of the city in which the university resides to enforce laws and preserve safety and security. Sometimes the campus has its own police force, and you'll see them driving around. And they may be wearing uniforms that are familiar to you on the campus, or they may be wearing police uniforms that look like the police force of the city and not the university. Cases of assault, hacking, or theft, for example, may involve the police and not be handled on campus. Sometimes the laws require that police be informed. What I mean here is that if you were to report a case of sexual harassment or sexual assault, your university may ask you to file a police report first. That would mean going to the police station and explaining the case to them. Now, I know from my own experience at the American University in Cairo, where I work, that students do not want to do this. They do not want to go to a police station to report a case of sexual assault. However, in the United States, it's a very normal thing. And the police simply take the information down and do not engage with the complainant and try to give the complainant advice about what to do or whether to drop the case or call the parents or anything. None of that will happen. It's a very routine thing in which you fill out a form, and then you'll take the form to the university, and it's only then that the university can start proceedings in this type of a case. Hacking is another situation in which if you are a victim of hacking at the university will probably ask you or probably inform the police and ask you to inform the police. So the police play a role in the United States with universities to offer a layer of protection when the case is really a legal case. And the police do not get involved with your with what you're saying or doing, or in other words, they are not really concerned with your position on political issues. So they are not going to care about which political candidate you like or whether you like the government of the United States or what you're saying online. That is not their business, and they don't care about that. They are very much concerned about safety and security. All universities should maintain a learning environment that is free of all forms of harassment and discrimination. And this includes harassment based on sex, gender, marital status, pregnancy, race, color, ethnicity, national origin, disability, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any other identity characteristic. For example, what you choose to wear on campus. And I apologize for the typo here on this slide with the word marital. It says Marshall, but it should say marital. So what this means is that the university will have its own code that protects against harassment and discrimination. This code may be the same or different from the one that exists in your state, and it may be the same or different from the one that exists in the federal government, the government in Washington. So there may be 3 layers of laws that govern harassment and discrimination. And in most cases, the universities have stronger laws and codes that handle harassment and discrimination. The university code will apply to you as it does to everyone else at your host institution. And you should see this code not as simply a code that you need to observe, but also as a code that is there to protect you and make your experience at your institution a stress-free one. You should never feel that you are a victim of discrimination and that no one cares. So we're not here discussing all the things that you need to do to avoid offending someone else. We are also talking about how you are protected against other people's offenses. You also are a student just like any other student. You're a teacher just like any other teacher, and you have all the rights and responsibilities of the rest of the members of the community at your host institution. The universities have the right to apply their policies at any place on their property or at any event that they sponsor, regardless of location. This would mean that a university sports event or a sponsored trip would fall under the university's policies. That means that if any type of sexual harassment happened on a sponsored trip and it involved you, you would come under this code, and the code would be applied to you and the person that you are. If you are the complainant, it would be applied to the respondent, and if you are the respondent, then it would be applied to you. When the respondent is a guest, not a member of the university community, the university's response to a complaint may be limited. The complainant may need to go to the police off campus. Before I continue, I want to explain the meaning of complainant and respondent. The complainant is the person that files the case. So the complainant is the person that reports that something happened. The respondent is the defendant, the person who is being accused of the offense and who has to defend himself or herself. Complainant and respondent. So sometimes we have cases where students come to the university and say, I was at a party and someone assaulted me. Now, if that person is not a member of the university, there is very little that the university can do. The university will then advise you to go to the police. If the student is also a member of the university, then it becomes much easier for the university to take action. Title IX. Title IX is a U.S. federal law that impacts all federally funded programs or activities. A federally funded program or activity is one in which the U.S. government is partially or fully paying for this program or activity at your institution. And what falls under this is any program that the State Department is funding, any program that USAID is funding, any program that the Department of Education is funding, any program that the state is funding. Well, excuse me, not really the state because it's not federally funded, but if the funds for the state program are coming from the federal government, then yes. It also applies to students who receive grants or loans or scholarships from the federal government. If they are at your institution, then Title IX applies to that part of the funding as well. Title IX protects against sex discrimination, including harassment. All universities should have a Title IX officer. This is a person that receives the complaints that are related to sex discrimination, including harassment. Universities provide training for students, faculty, and staff so that they understand the Title IX policy. Training includes definitions of sex discrimination and sexual misconduct, reporting or filing of a complaint, and what guidance and support are available. This is typically what a sexual harassment training might look like, and this might happen very early in the semester. It sometimes happens at your, you may have Title IX training or sexual harassment training at your PDO when you arrive in the United States. You may have it when you arrive at your host institution. And in a way, you're having it right now because we're talking about it, and we will be talking about it at the PDO. Know your Title IX. Later on, you'll be provided with more details on the policy, but it's very important for you to be empowered. You should understand that some of the behaviors and attitudes that can be accepted in your culture or some other cultures may in fact be violations under Title IX. And you should also understand that the definition of harassment may be different than how you currently understand it in your own country. For example, harassment in the United States can include comments made about a person in person or online, or following or stalking a person. So harassment is not just touching another person. It can be verbal. So you need to ask yourself the following about your own attitudes right now. Do your current attitudes about what is permissible and not permissible with regard to sex-based behavior put you at risk of having a problem while in the United States? You may be more at risk if you believe any of the following: that there are significant differences between the sexes, and these differences mean that some activities, programs, or disciplines are appropriate for one sex but not the other. So, for example, if you were the director of athletics and you thought that basketball is an appropriate sport for boys but not for girls, and you prevented the girls from practicing or trying out for basketball, you could have a problem under Title IX. If you believe that one sex is privileged in some ways over the other. So, for example, if you think that, if you're in the United States and you think that there should be a curfew on females in the dorms but not on males, this means you think that the males are privileged in some ways over the females, and this could put you at risk of a Title IX violation. People who do not behave modestly in dress and manner are at fault for sexual aggression that is committed against them. So if your attitude is that if let's say a female dresses in a revealing manner, and as a result not as a result, but after that, she's sexually assaulted, if you tell her, well, you shouldn't have dressed that way, this can cause you a lot of problems. If you think that people who are open about their sexuality are at fault for how others treat them. So you may have students who are openly what we call now LGBTQ plus or LGBTQA plus or I plus. They're openly gay. You may have students who are openly trans. You may have students who are very open in class about things. And they may then, at some point, receive negative comments from other students. And you may feel that, well, they should keep these things to themselves. This could also cause you problems. And it is if you believe that it is the responsibility of females, not males, to enforce limits in a sexual relationship. This could also cause you problems if you display these attitudes to your students, or if you try to use them to argue a certain type of behavior. How are universities proactive under Title IX? Every U.S. university should state clearly in its policies that it is proactively committed to maintaining an environment that is safe and free from sex and gender discrimination and sexual violence and harassment. This is a requirement under Title IX. Are there any universities that don't abide by Title IX? Well, if there is a university that is 100% privately funded and receives no support from the U.S. government, then in theory it could not observe Title IX. However, most universities that fall in this category, and there are not very many, but most universities that fall in this category also believe in Title IX as a principle and support it. By federal law, any institution subject to Title IX will take immediate action to eliminate violations and prevent their recurrence. This means that if you report a violation, or if a violation is reported against you, it should be handled immediately. There should not be a long waiting time. There are two types of complaints, formal and informal. An informal complaint may be handled by a dean, a supervisor, an advisor, or any responsible employee. You may find that an informal complaint is handled just with a conversation or a warning, and the warning might just be oral. In other words, nothing is written down. So a first offense may just be a reminder or a suggestion that the behavior not be repeated. An informal complaint may result in a warning or an order for the accused to have no contact with the complainant. If you are required to have no contact with the complainant, this could be have a serious effect on your FLTA program, because having no contact with someone may mean that you have to be removed from the environment, and removing you from the environment may mean removing you from the university. And if you are removed from the university, this would invalidate your J-1 visa, because your J-1 visa is given to you because you have a how can I put it? You're posted and you're hosted by a university. A formal complaint activates the university's disciplinary process, and there is an established procedure everywhere, and you'll see it online because the policy for Title IX and the Code of Conduct will be published on your university's policy page, the university's website. And always within 60 days, the complaint is investigated. Now you might think 60 days is not immediate, but the process will happen immediately. And it could be that when the process happens, the person who is the respondent is told that they, or he or she, cannot come onto campus. And so even though the final conclusion doesn't happen for 60 days, the person who is the respondent may be told to stay away. That would, in your case, be a very unfortunate happening. The universities will determine whether it is more likely than not based on evidence that a violation occurred. This is called, in legal terms, a preponderance of evidence. That means that they do not have to have evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt, but they simply have to have it preponderance. So it is more likely than not that something happened. As I said, while waiting for a decision, an accused member of the university could be banned from attending programs and activities. And sometimes, as I said before, a person who is complaining, the complainant will file a police report. This must be the case when we're talking about sexual assault, because sexual assault is a crime. And so therefore the police will get involved. If a police report is filed against a Fulbrighter and the police become involved, there is very little that the university, an IIE program officer, or Fulbright can do to assist. The right to due process and investigation applies to all persons within the United States, including foreign Fulbright students. That means that no conclusions can be made until an investigation happens, and the investigation must follow procedure as stated in the policy of the university. If the defendant or the respondent, the defendant is the respondent, if the defendant is found to have committed a serious offense, the universities and the courts do not care whether the defendant or the respondent says he or she was serious or joking, didn't know it was discrimination, was acting according to religious beliefs, thought it was harmless, or didn't know the law of the United States. The respondent or the defendant will be punished. Finally, Title IX also protects members of a university against false accusations. So you should not be afraid that someone might falsely accuse you of harassment if you have not done anything. If you should need to file your own complaint, do not be afraid of retaliation. In other words, do not say, well, if you want to file a complaint against your professor, don't be afraid that the complaint is going to affect your grade. Finally, once a complaint has been filed, do not attempt to obstruct the process of investigation. So you must be cooperative with the people who are conducting the investigation. Now about being smart and being safe. Alcohol is a common feature at parties in the United States, and especially so at student parties off campus. You may hear about Greek life at your host institution. Greek life is a cultural phenomenon in the United States where young men and women or students join fraternities and sororities. And sometimes these fraternities and sororities have parties, and in many cases alcohol is involved, and students can become intoxicated. There are higher rates of reported sexual assault when alcohol is consumed in these surroundings. So you should be diligent when you're surrounded by people consuming alcohol, and also be careful when people offer you drinks unless you are sure what you are drinking. What I mean by this is, if you decide to go to one of these parties, please remember that when people are drinking, their behavior changes, or it can change depending on how much they've had to drink. Another thing is that, and I recommend that you do not accept drinks from people you do not know, or from punch bowls if you do not know what is in the punch, or I think it would be safe to assume that if you're drinking something that hasn't been opened, that it's fine. And if you're drinking from in a restaurant, then it should be fine. But I'm talking mainly about parties where you just don't know what's been prepared and who's giving it to you. Also, it is perfectly fine to tell people that you do not drink. There are many people in the United States that do not drink, just as there are many people who don't eat meat or don't eat chicken or don't eat dairy. And so it's simply a dietary, it's just a dietary alternative. You don't drink alcohol. And therefore, don't be ashamed or embarrassed to go out with people and just say you don't drink. It's very normal. So thanks for watching this introductory video, and I wish you an enjoyable and successful Fulbright experience. And now, please see the attachment that was sent to you by email. This is Activity 8, and this is the last activity that we're asking you to complete before the PDO in Casablanca. So see you there.